Hi, this is Dr. Sean Bostic. Welcome to part two when confident leaders need a handler. In part one, we discuss how intelligent and confident individuals are able to share their viewpoints and then able to object to your input because they are so smart that they're able to use your own words or your own objectives in order to defend their position. In this section, we will understand how this behavior starts to become normal within the organization, causing some truly devastating consequences. And it's a shame to, in this age where we are trying to improve innovation and encourage creativity. However, there are some things that we can take away for improvements in our own organization. I hope you watch my next little video and I'll come back to you when it's over.
The organization that learns to manage the leader. The meeting ended, but the directors did not immediately return to work. Some remained in the conference room. Others gathered in offices or exchanged private messages. They were no longer discussing whether returning to the office was the right decision. They were discussing the leader's reaction. Who should present the retention numbers? Do not mention the employee survey again. He thinks it is a popularity contest. Maybe we should frame it as a space planning issue. The organization was no longer managing the work, it was managing the leader. Anxiety becomes part of the operating model. The directors were not afraid of disagreement itself. Their anxiety came from not knowing how disagreement would affect them. Would raising a concern make them appear resistant to change? Would the leader question their loyalty, judgment, or ability to manage employees? Would the concern be remembered during a future promotion or performance review? No one had to threaten them directly. They had learned that some information created more risk for the person delivering it than for the organization receiving it. Before presenting an idea, directors predicted the leader's mood, adjusted their wording, removed details that might trigger an argument, and decided which colleagues should speak. Meetings were still described as collaborative, but the directors were no longer asking, "What does the organization need to understand?" They were asking, "What can we say without provoking the wrong reaction?" Anxiety had become an organizational control. It did not prohibit disagreement, it simply made disagreement expensive. A changing organization that cannot learn. The leader viewed himself as an advocate for change. He believed employees needed to return to the office, managers needed to strengthen accountability, and the culture needed to become more connected. These were not unreasonable goals. The problem was his belief that confidence in the direction was enough to make the change successful. The directors understood details he did not. Some employees had been hired outside the commuting area under the hybrid policy. One department lacked enough office space. Some employees worked more effectively at home, while new employees benefited from in person training. Certain departments could return immediately. Others needed equipment, scheduling changes, or additional space. These were not arguments against change. They were the information required to implement change responsibly. Because the leader interpreted operational concerns as resistance, directors stopped presenting the full picture. They accepted the decision and quietly made it workable. The organization experienced constant directives, but the leader's assumptions remained protected. The company was changing, but it was not learning. The handler becomes the informal operating system. Over time, directors limited recommendations that required the leader to reconsider a conclusion. The safest approach was to wait for the decision and manage its consequences. One senior director became the person who spoke with him after difficult meetings. She knew which words he rejected and which arguments he respected. He might dismiss employee morale, but consider business continuity. He might reject concerns about commuting, but listen to recruiting costs. He resisted being told that a decision was impractical, but accepted suggestions framed as ways to strengthen his plan. Others began asking her, "What is the best way to tell him? Can you mention it first? Would it be better coming from you?" Her role appeared valuable because she reduced conflict. She softened announcements, repaired relationships, and added practical protections after decisions had been made. But her success concealed the seriousness of the problem. Because she translated concerns into acceptable language, senior management saw fewer conflicts. Because directors made his ideas workable, the decisions appeared more successful than they would have been without intervention. That is when support becomes accommodation. The handler is no longer helping a leader consider a difficult perspective. She is helping the organization function without requiring him to consider it, protecting the leader from reality. Everyone learned a role. The leader made decisions. The handler translated them. Directors absorbed the consequences. Managers explained the changes. Employees adjusted their lives and workloads. Human resources managed turnover. Facilities found the space. When implementation succeeded, the leader felt justified. The invisible labor that made the decision workable was rarely included in the assessment. The leader saw the outcome and concluded that his judgment was correct. The directors knew it succeeded because they quietly corrected what he refused to hear. The greatest risk was not one wrong decision. It was that the leader would stop receiving accurate information. Directors softened bad news. Employees withheld concerns. Peers avoided disagreement. The handler filtered what reached him. The leader became confident because the organization had removed the friction that might have improved his judgment. Silence became evidence of agreement. Compliance became evidence of commitment. Successful implementation became evidence that the original decision was sound. The organization created an environment in which the leader could remain confident without becoming more accurate. The human edge. The human edge is not merely the courage to tell a leader that a decision may be wrong. It is the organizational discipline to ensure that the person raising a concern does not carry more risk than the decision creating it. Healthy organizations do not require employees to predict a leader's reaction before presenting important information. They do not treat operational knowledge as resistance or confuse authority with complete understanding. A leader may have the authority to make the final decision, but authority does not eliminate the responsibility to understand what others will need to carry it out. The question is not simply whether the return to office plan worked. The deeper questions are: how much anxiety did the organization absorb to make it work? How many people stopped offering ideas because they knew the conclusion would not change? How much invisible work was required to repair the decision? What happens when the next decision is too consequential for the handler to fix? An organization has a leadership problem when employees are no longer focused on managing the work. They are focused on managing the person who leads it.
Hey, did you enjoy that? I hope so. The human edge is not simply about the courage to speak up or to make your voice heard when a leader says something and you have a opposing viewpoint. The human edge is about putting yourself out there and having discussions to where you're both contributing an answer to a much needed problem. It was never about if the strong opinion of coming back to work was good or bad. It was about getting everyone in the room and discussing how to make it work. As you can see, in some of these situations and cases, it may create unnecessary anxiety, not only for the employees who have to go ahead and deal with the consequences of a changed schedule, but also to the directors who were trying to provide that value feedback needed by the leader in order to make the transition smoothly. That's what the human edge is about. It's about working together, it's about listening to each other, it's about coming together and making sure that we can have healthy organizations who can potentially that output is a healthy experience for our clients. I hope you enjoyed this session. I'm sure I did. I am quite sure I did. No, I really did. And I look forward to talking to you later. All right. Bye bye.